Hello everyone, Lunar here, and welcome to the Week 1 and 2 episode for the Delirium and 3.10 Challenge League. Before we start, I would like to apologise for the late episode this time around. I have been sick with the flu, so I was unable to record any videos as a result in the past few weeks. My sincerest apologies for the delay. I should be back with weekly episodes for the next few months as per usual. I'm currently aiming for about 7 or 8 episodes this league, but we'll see how the economy progresses and how long the league stays interesting. Additionally, this episode will likely be a little bit longer, so I can cover everything that I find necessary. I hope you'll enjoy the episode regardless, though. Now, for viewers that prefer an audio-only version of the Chaos Report, you'll be able to find it over on my Patreon for free as per usual. You'll be able to find a link to the voice-only versions in the descriptions down below. And a quick reminder, you can also find the timestamps to each section in the pinned comment down below. Okay? Thank you. Do keep in mind that this entire video is based on educated guesses or predictions, and as such they might not be entirely accurate. Furthermore, I might miss a thing or two that seem obvious to many, and for that I apologize. It's hard to cover everything after all. If I do miss something you think is important, leave it in the comments down below. And what that means, of course, is invest at your own risk. And with the usual disclaimer out of the way, let's finally jump in. The first segment breaks down currencies and commodities, such as the Influence, Exalted Orbs, and Fragments, including the new Simulacrum splinters. I'll be giving a quick overview on the most important currencies during this past week, and predictions on how they'll likely continue to progress in the following one. First up, the Exalted Orbs. The OG Exalted Orb has followed our predictions fairly closely. It has seen a rapid ascent into the 130 Chaos region during the first 3 days of the league, followed by a slight dip down to the 115 Chaos area for a few days. It is currently remaining stable at the 110 to 120 Chaos price point, as it is customary for Exalted Orbs during the early league stages. As the impact of the new Exalted Orbs is still difficult to gauge, it is unclear as to how the OG Orbs will behave in the coming weeks, but I would not be surprised to see them reach the high 100 Chaos marks. I would expect them to rise and then stabilize somewhere around the 150 to 170 Chaos area in the following week or two, and remain there for a while before potentially rising even further. As mentioned during the prediction episode, Exalted Orbs have the potential to see an incredible amount of demand for this league, comparatively to previous leagues, due to the fossil crafting changes and cluster jewel implementation as outlined in the last episode. Following that, I would not be surprised to see prices upwards of 200 Chaos for an individual Exalted Orb later on during this league. This usually happens around the 60-day mark or so. As for the Influence, Exalted, and Awaken Orbs, let's take a look at them. The Hunter's Exalted Orb has dropped from its number 1 price point of the previous leagues. It is currently sitting at around 285 Chaos and appears to be rather stable at this price point. With the fossil crafting changes, we've seen a large shift in the overall meta regarding the Influence Exalted Orbs. The Hunter's Exalted Orb did not get too many good new affixes, whereby other orbs, especially the Warlords, did. As a result, the Hunter's Exalted Orb has remained the same in terms of its popularity, but in the direct comparison with the other orbs, it lost out a bit. It's currently tied at number 2 with the Awakener Orb. The price will likely stick around this area for a bit, but be aware that once the OG Exalted Orbs rise in price, the Influence and Awakener Orbs will also rise in price equally, as they are currently priced in Exalts. The Awakener Orb is currently sitting at around 290 Chaos, and shares its number 2 spot with the Hunter's Orb as previously mentioned. Most players have not gotten to the point yet where Awakener Orb will be their primary way to advance their characters, and as a result, the demand is not at its highest point. We will likely see the Awakener Orb stick around its rough price point as well, as the supply will increase pretty much equally to the demand as more and more players get to Awakening level 8 and start to farm Sincerest. Always keep an eye on this orb in particular, as it can be very easily be influenced by content creators releasing a new build guide or similar that depends on a double influence chess piece, so keep that in mind. Crusader and Warlord's Exalted Orbs have been sharing a spot in the Chaos Report up until now, as their mod pools were mostly similar in terms of usefulness and thus demand. However, the Warlord's Exalted Orb has seen a dramatic increase in popularity as a result of the fossil crafting changes introduced in 3.10. Specifically, the minus 15 mana cost to attacks mod for chest pieces is a large cause for this insane increase in prices, as all the Cyclone players, which you will later see there are a lot of, see this as a mandatory mod for their builds. As a result, we'll be splitting those two orbs into their own segments here. The Warlord's Exalted Orb is currently the most expensive of the orbs with a large lead, sitting at around 395 Chaos, but is also currently dropping. We will likely continue to see this orb be one of the most popular, if not the most popular, of the orbs, thanks to Cyclone's popularity among the player base. Similar to the other orbs, keep in mind that changes to the OG orb will affect the prices of this one as well. The Crusader Orbs are currently sitting at around 240 Chaos. They have not really seen a large difference to last league in terms of supply and demand, as they'll likely retain their number 3 spot, similar to last league. They have their uses, especially for the Explosion chess piece, that people are really excited about, but the demand is not high enough to really make a dent in the rest of the Orb's mod pool, which is less than stellar, really. Expect this orb to continue falling to around 110 to 230 Chaos in the next little while, as the supply still hasn't reached its zenith. Lastly, on everybody's list really, the Redeemer's Exalted Orb. Despite getting a few nice tidbits from the fossil crafting change, the Redeemer's Exalted Orb is still the least popular orb among the lot. It's sitting at around 180 Chaos right now, but seems to also still be falling, similar to the Crusader Orb. Personally, I find the Redeemer influence to be extremely useful as a secondary influence for most Awakener Orb crafts, as the mods it provides are universally useful, rather than being more specialized like the other Orbs mod pools. I would expect a rough price about 20 or 30 Chaos above the OG Exalted Orbs for this one in the near future. However, again, the OG Exalted Orb prices will affect this one as well, so keep an eye on it. As per usual, with the entire Exalted Orb section, it's very hard to make 100% accurate predictions. As such, if you intend on buying them, make sure to keep an eye on this extremely volatile market space, and check them regularly to find the best time to buy and sell them. Usually, buying them is better in the early hours of the day, and selling them is better in the late hours. Alteration Orbs have followed our predictions pretty much to the letter. They've seen their highest price point ever, shooting up to an unprecedented 3.7 to 1 ratio over the first few weeks. The crafting craze has slowly been subsiding, as more and more players have acquired their cluster jewels and main items, so the prices have started falling again already, but they're still extremely expensive, comparatively to previous leagues, so make no mistake. They're currently sitting at around 4.5 to 1 ratio, and will likely stick around the 4 to 5 to 1 area for the majority of the league if I had to take a guess. I had already predicted this would happen in the previous episode, due to the heavy increase in alteration craftable items in the past leagues, such as the new influence bases and now the cluster jewels. It is fairly likely that Alteration Orbs will remain in this price point from now on in every league, as most of these changes are either core already or will be going core in the future. Without a heavy increase in supply for Alteration Orbs throughout a league mechanic or similar, we will likely not see them be as cheap as in leagues before 3.9 ever again. That being prices in either 7 or even 9 to 1 ratio. While Alteration Orbs are this expensive, it is worthwhile to pick up talismans, breach rings, and other jewelry items to vendor them for extra profit. An inventory full of these jewelry items can easily net upwards of like 30 Alteration Orbs, which is equivalent to about like 5, 6, 7, or 8 Chaos per map, depending on the current ratio. Last but not least, I guess, the Ancient Orb. I mentioned in the prediction episode that these would not see a lot of use this league, but I had not counted on the fact that the league mechanic would absolutely spit out Ancient Orbs like nothing. They are currently sitting at around a 4 Chaos price point. 4. This is due to an insanely high oversupply, thanks to the Delirium league mechanic and especially the Simulacrum. There is no real demand for the Ancient Orbs, as the main Ancient Orb target, that being the Headhunter, is not available to be chanced this league, as the Zana Nemesis mod is not available. As a result, unless there is a new development and somebody figures out a way to make a large amount of currency with them and publicizes it, they will likely remain on their lowest price point ever throughout the league. We will be taking another look at them next week, but if there are no further changes, which I would imagine is fairly likely, we will be replacing them with a different currency to keep track of. For the commodity section, we'll be covering the different fragment pieces, as well as the synthesis and guardian maps, and lastly, we'll also be taking a look at the new Simulacrum encounter. If there is something you would like to see for the commodity section that I haven't mentioned just now, please make sure to let me know in the comments as per usual. I'll quickly update you on the prices for the different maps and fragments for this week, and give my predictions for the upcoming one as well. Shaper fragments range from 40 to 48 Chaos, meaning that one Shaper set will net you about 200 Chaos at average. They are likely to continue their rise in the coming days, as more and more people reach the endgame and want to try their hands on the Shaper flight. This is especially true as the Solstice Vigil, which is a Shaper exclusive drop, is at an all-time high due to a very popular build that recently emerged. It is currently sitting at around 27 Exalted Orbs, which makes the Shaper fight a very lucrative endeavor. Even just getting one of these drops every 16 or so runs will make you a profit. And that's not even including any other items that drop, such as the Uber fragments, which are guaranteed to drop every run and recoup about half your investment anyway. So yeah, they're very good. The Uber fragments provided by Shaper, on the other hand, have seen a large decrease in price, as more people are running Shaper than ever before. They're currently at around 83 Kaos each, comparatively to the about 150 from last league, while the ones provided by Elder are sitting at around 23 to 40 Kaos, which is fairly normal. That means one Uber set will net you about 250 Kaos at average. Usually, these go for about 350 to 400 Kaos. This is the lowest price we've had so far since the introduction of the Uber fragments in 3.9. It's a direct result of the fact that many of the Uber uniques are simply not popular in the current meta. There are only 2 chase items left in the Uber fight that see some popularity. That being the Eternity Shroud, which is also losing value as less people are using it than before, and of course the 3-mod Watcher's Eye, which is still enjoying its usual popularity and probably will never come out of fashion. If you are confident in your luck, now is the best time ever to run Uber Elder for those juicy 3-mod Watcher's Eyes. The fragments overall might continue to see a dip in prices, as more and more people flock towards the Shaper lottery. If that is the case, the prices for the fragments will drop corresponding to the amount of Shapers run. Keep an eye on the Shaper fragments to predict the prices for the Uber Elder fragments. If the prices for Shaper rises, the Uber Elder fragments will likely drop, up to a certain point, at which people stop running Shaper and Uber Elder prices will rise again. The Elder fragments themselves are sitting at around 20 to 37 Chaos each, meaning that one set will net you around 110 to 150 Chaos. Right now, I would recommend running your own Elder sets and selling the resulting items to other players. Especially in presences are still fairly decent, and you know what, they're not really that expensive, so you might as well try. The Synthesis unique maps are all sitting at around 55 to 70 Chaos right now, with the exception being the Cortex, which currently is sitting at around 3x or about 355 Chaos and rising, of course. As I mentioned during the prediction episode, this is likely a side effect of the increase in popularity for the Herald rings. Especially now, as more and more players are switching to the Herald Abuse builds, the well-rolled rings are more popular than ever before. Additionally, with many players still sitting at around Awakening level 5 to 6, the supply for them is also fairly low still, but will be increasing in the next week. As a result, expect a slight dip in prices for the general maps. I would expect the Cortex to continue its rise though, as it usually sits at around 400 to 500 Chaos price point throughout most leagues. If you get one of these dropped, my honest recommendation would be to straight up sell them. At the current prices, it is hard to turn a reliable profit. While the jackpot hits are very high, of course, they are also very hard to hit. As a result, unless you can get about 10 or 20 of any of these maps, you're likely better off selling them to other players for the guaranteed profit. Lastly, our new League edition, the Simulacrum and its splinters. I'm currently compiling a spreadsheet of Simulacrum runs and its profit per hour and profit per run stats, which I'll be covering in next week's strategy and discussion segment. My apologies for being a bit slow on this one, I'm trying my hardest. The Simulacrum splinters are currently going for a 3-to-1 ratio. As a result, a full Simulacrum is worth around 100 Chaos in pure splinter value alone. The full Simulacrum, however, as is usual with splinters and the full stones, is only worth about 80 to 85 Chaos at the moment. They are highly worthwhile to run, if your build can handle at least 18 out of 20 rounds. You pretty much always guaranteed a profit, with stronger builds being able to run more of them per hour and also obtaining more rewards through the 19th and 20th rounds. Additionally, the real jackpot hit here is the one useless passive unique jewel, the Voices, which is currently worth about a Mirror of Kalandra. Don't expect to drop any of these unique jewels, however. I've ran over 20 of them to completion and haven't seen a single one, just as a word of warning. Don't be expecting the jackpot. They're still extremely worthwhile to run, and I highly recommend it, if you are strong enough to handle it. I'll be breaking down the exact profit margins in next week's episode, as I mentioned earlier, so please look forward to that. With those currencies and commodities covered, let's move on to our unique item watch list. I'll be entirely reworking the unique item watch list from the prediction episode. I've decided to keep the list fairly short for the first 3 to 4 weeks, as the meta is usually rapidly developing, and fixating on too many fluctuating items at once will not lead to any interesting results, I have learned. Some of the items I mentioned in the previous episode have seen fairly good popularity early on, and others have been completely ignored by the player base. To not waste any time, let's just take a look at the new watch list instead. The first item on our list is going to be the Voices Unique Cluster Jewel. I originally intended not to include them, as everyone should have heard about them by now, but I figured if I leave them out, y'all are gonna rip me apart in the comments. So here I am, covering the Voices. The Voices is a unique cluster jewel that comes equipped with a guaranteed 3 jewel sockets, which is the highest possible amount you can get through any means in the game. This means that you can socket up to 3 medium jewels and 3 small jewels for each Voices you equip, rather than the usual 2 of each. This makes the Voices an incredibly powerful tool for all builds that do not require a large jewel notable, but rather focus on medium or small jewels instead. The Voices exist in 4 different forms with cascading rarity. The most common versions incorporate 7 useless passives that grant nothing. As a result, in order to gain the 3 jewel sockets, you're basically paying a tax of 7 passive points. The next version incorporates 5 useless passives that grant nothing, then 3 useless passives. And lastly, the holy grail for every build that uses the jewel, the 1 useless passive version. This last version is by far the most expensive unique item that we've seen in a very long time. It is incredibly rare and incredibly powerful at the current moment, due to the Herald abuse builds. The Herald cluster jewels are medium, which makes the Voices even more powerful for this particular than for most other builds, as the Herald jewel's power stacks incredibly hard for each individual jewel that you can socket. As a result, they have risen to absolutely insane prices. The 7 passive version is obviously the cheapest one, selling at only 7 Exalted Orbs. The 5 passive version is selling for 18 Exalts. The 3 passive version is currently going for around 55 Exalted Orbs. And the 1 passive version is sitting at a ridiculously staggering 125 Exalts, or otherwise known as a Mirror of Kalandra. You can obtain these jewels from the Delirium endgame encounter, the Simulacrum. They can only drop as a result of killing one of the 2 bosses, either Omniphobia or Kaos. I've personally never gotten either of them yet, after about 20 or so runs, as I mentioned earlier, so don't expect these jewels to drop a lot. However, as I'll cover in the next episode, the Simulacrum itself is definitely worth running, as you might as well try and farm for these jewels if you're strong enough to handle it. Next up, the Solstice Vigil. Since I've covered the Voices, I gotta cover this one as well. This is one of the pieces required for the hardcore abusers of the Herald builds. With the Voices and enough Herald cluster jewels, the amount of aura effect, which modifies this amulet's aura as well, leads to ridiculous results where players can get buffs to last for minutes instead of mere seconds. This is, of course, extremely popular among the headhunter crowd, which is always looking for a way to break the game with those items. As a result of this, the popularity for it has reached unprecedented heights. It has shot up to a 28 Exalted price point in the past few days and shows no real signs of stopping. It is likely going to reach its zenith fairly soon, however, as more players will start to farm Shaper to provide a larger supply for these, as Shaper runs are extremely cheap, as covered earlier in the episode. Following that, I would recommend potentially waiting on buying these and hurrying up with your selling process if you own one of them, as they are likely going to be falling in the next little while. I'll be adding more items to the list over the next couple of episodes, but for now those 2 will be our only items. They are likely to be a staple for the remainder of the league, so I figured it would make sense to give them an early permanent spot and cover them as soon as possible. Now, moving on to our third segment for this video, the meta-analysis. A lot of the first episode's predictions came true. A large majority of players are still playing Cyclone as their main ability. It is currently sitting at a 21% play rate, and is seeing a large popularity across the board for all kinds of builds, be it cast on crit, simple physical impale, or completely wonky cast while channeling builds. Cyclone is the king of the country at the moment, and there seems to be no stopping it. especially with the new cluster jewels adding incredibly strong channeling notables, which do affect Cyclone, of course. It's hard to make an argument against using it. The second most useful use skill is Stormbrand. It is very popular in combination with the newly added Archmage support gem, as it can snapshot the damage it provides without having to rely heavily on mana or mana regeneration that other Archmage builds have to keep in mind. It is currently sitting at a 9% play rate. Outside of that, the meta, from an Ascendancy perspective, is extremely varied. We got 11% Assassins, 10% Tricksters, 10% Champions, 9% Hierophants, 9% Necromancers, 8% Guardians, 8% Gladiators, and 7% Saboteurs. This is the most varied Ascendancy meta we've ever seen in, literally forever, basically. I'm assuming that the cluster jewels are to thank for that, as many of these Ascendancies lacked one thing or another that is heavily being fixed by the cluster jewels' existence. As a result, I would argue that cluster jewels are an incredible addition to the game, and hope they'll continue to exist past this league. We are currently seeing a large surge in Herald-based builds, thanks to the broken notables and the Voices unique jewel as mentioned earlier. I'm not entirely sure how this will affect the overall meta, so I will make no predictions on how it will continue to evolve in the next week, as it seems fairly impossible to properly predict at the moment. As for the Atlas analysis, it's actually quite simple. Running the highest tier map possible with 5 Delirium Orbs on it is the high-end strategy. This incorporates unique watchstones to buff up the tier of the map further, as well as Awakened Sextons, Scarabs, Delirium Orbs, and extremely powerful builds. The main maps used for this are Burial Chambers for the Headhunter card drops, as well as Canyon for its easy layout. The favored map system is helping a great deal in sustaining the chosen map that you would like to farm. While it is not a set and forget option for most players, once you start beefing up your maps in this aforementioned manner, you will see yourself practically flooded with the maps of your choosing. For players that can't quite hit these targets yet, which is likely the majority of the player base, I can only recommend Canyon, as it is a very open and linear map which makes succeeding at this Delirium encounters especially easy. Consider using your Alva missions to extend the Delirium encounter and increase your reward meter further. The timer stops whenever you enter an incursion, and the mobs inside will provide a large quantity boost to your overall reward set. Try to aim for as high as an Awakening objective completion as possible, in order to acquire the maximum amount of master missions from each map. This will make sure that you always have exactly the master you require for your farming purposes. And lastly, as always, Awakening level 8 Cirrus and Conquerors are extremely worthwhile to farm. Also, his name is Cirrus, not Sirius, people, please. The Awakened gems are in high demand, and the Savior, which drops exclusively from Awakening level 8 Cirrus, is at an all-time high in terms of prices, thanks to the extreme popularity of Cyclone users in this league. With the meta and Atlas analysis finished, let's jump right into the strategy discussion for this week. I'll be covering the basics of cluster jewel crafting, as in how to identify and choose good bases, which enchants are especially popular, and what kind of roles will be best in slot in some of the examples. Additionally, I'll be covering a few different crafting methods and giving my opinion on which one is the best one for each different kind of jewel. Now, first things first, what the hell are cluster jewels? Cluster jewels are a new addition to Path of Exile's passive tree, and they currently are exclusive drops from the Delirium encounters. It is highly likely they'll be added to the core gain in some capacity, but whether they'll be added in exactly the same way or how we will be able to obtain them in the future is as of yet unknown. The cluster jewels are craftable additions, which are socketed into the outermost jewel sockets of your passive tree. They provide around 280 different, entirely new notables that have never been seen before. Additionally, there are a few unique cluster jewels which can add powerful keystone abilities, but we won't be taking a look at them here, as this section focuses on the craftable ones instead. There are 3 different sizes of cluster jewels, which can all be socketed into the outermost jewel sockets. However, they can also be socketed from largest to smallest size if the jewels have their own jewel sockets included. As a result, you can socket large jewels first, then socket medium or small jewels into the sockets provided by the large one, and then lastly, socket small jewels into the sockets provided by the medium ones. With the normal crafted jewel, you can acquire a total chain of 5 cluster jewels per outer jewel on your passive tree. Large jewels can provide 2 jewel sockets, and the medium jewels can provide 1 each. Small jewels can be socketed into any jewel socket that can fit a cluster jewel, but do not grant any sockets themselves. The overall split and design goal behind the cluster jewels is as follows. Large jewels are the most common ones that will drop. As a result, they're easy to acquire for most casual players. These jewels feature primarily offensive notables. Medium jewels are a bit more common than the large ones. You'll find a couple of these over the course of the league as a casual player. These jewels feature primarily mechanic-based improvements. A large portion of these jewels can also be considered to have more offensive-focused notables, but unlike the large ones, they also usually focus on improving underrepresented mechanics such as war cries, for example. Small jewels are the rarest of the bunch. For casual players, these might be hard to find yourself, and you'll likely be better off buying them from other players, if you intend on getting the right one for you. These jewels focus exclusively on defensive notables and stats. They don't offer any offensive bonuses for the most part. With the general rundown out of the way, let's get into the specifics for crafting and potentially profiting off of the newly introduced cluster jewels. Please be aware that the information provided here will not cover every possible avenue of crafting or selling the jewels, and is intended to be more of a guideline, so you may figure out the appropriate markets yourself. If I just revealed every possible highest profit endeavor, it would no longer be a high profit endeavor for you to pursue in the first place. Instead, I'll show you the ways that I, personally, have made currency off of these for the past 2 weeks. I don't mind ruining my own market, as I can always find new ones. Now, let's get into it. The easiest cluster jewels to make a profit with are probably the large ones. This is due to their ability to roll 2 sockets. Getting any 2-socket jewel with a decent notable will usually net you upwards of like 50 Kaos already. No real difficult crafting process involved beyond that point. To start off with crafting large jewels, make sure you have the following 3 things. The eye level of the jewel needs to be at or above level 75. This is the minimum requirement to roll the 2 sockets, which will be a detrimental part of the crafting process for any large jewel. The number of small passive needs to be 8 or 9. Any higher than that and the jewel becomes too much of a point sink for anybody to seriously consider picking up above a 50 Chaos price point. Lastly, you have to choose the correct enchant. One of the best current enchants to craft is the Axe and Sword based enchant, which will be shown on the right. These enchants determine the overall notables that can be rolled. I'll leave a link to a spreadsheet which lists all the different enchants and the corresponding notables in the description down below. For our crafting example, we'll be starting with one such jewel, as these are the primary ways I have made currency with cluster jewels in the past. The crafting bases for these jewels, which cover all 3 bases previously described, have been selling for upwards of 30 to 50 Chaos in the previous week. Since the overall demand for the jewels has gone down, however, they are back down to a moderate 5 to 20 Chaos price point to start your crafts with. Many players have heavily undersold those crafting bases in the past few weeks, which made it extremely easy to turn a large profit on them, as many players didn't realize that the item level or the number of passives or the enchant was in any way important to the pricing. Once you've acquired the base, you have to choose a crafting method. There are 3 main ways to craft cluster jewels: the Alt and Regal method, the Chaos spamming, and the fossil crafting. The most commonly used one is to alteration spam them until you hit the 2 preferred affixes, then hope for a decent Regal and go from there with either a slam or selling it. This is the method that I have used to make about 40 Exalts worth of cluster jewels in the past 2 weeks. However, I would advise against this crafting method for the time being, as the alterational prices are at an all-time high. For the jewel I mentioned earlier, I would focus on either Blood Scent or Deep Cuts, which are both prefixes, so you can only get one or the other within an alterational, as well as the 2 jewel sockets, of course. Getting any of the 2 prefixes in combination with the double socket suffix automatically netted about 50 Chaos of profit, with up to multiple Exalts for a decent Regal hit. The absolute jackpot hit was to get both Blood Scent and Deep Cuts together with 2 jewel sockets. This could only be achieved through a lucky Regal, and it averaged happened about once every 120 tries that I regaled such a magic base. These jewels would sell for upwards of like 5 Exalted Orbs each. Right now, any of these 2 notables in combination with the double jewel socket are still easily worth over 50 to 60 Chaos, so it is still considered a fairly worthwhile endeavor for now if you get lucky enough to hit them often. Hitting the jackpot roll mentioned earlier is worth about 20 plus Exalted Orbs, with Deep Cuts, Blood Scent, and 2 jewel sockets, with any other 4th if you have one. But it should not be the expected return, of course. The second method of crafting is the Chaos Spam method. For this one, you simply take a Chaos Orb and slam it into the jewel until you hit the desired result. I would recommend this crafting method for large cluster jewels, as the 4th affix is quite useful in determining overall price of a jewel, and Alteration Orbs are simply too expensive to use for crafting these at the moment. Do skip over once they are back to a 5:1 or higher ratio though, of course. The last method is fossil crafting them. There are some advantages and disadvantages to fossil crafting, but for large jewels in particular, fossil crafting is not recommended, as the notables do not get influenced by the fossil multipliers, and as such, you'd basically just be using more expensive Chaos Orbs, so don't do it. Moving on to the prime crafting market of the past few days, the medium cluster jewels. The primary jewels here are the ones that offer chaos damage over time multiplier, and also the recent new favorite, increased damage while affected by a herald. You're looking for the following statistics for your crafting base. The number of small passive needs to be 4 or 5. There is no functional difference between the two, but if you go for 6 or higher, one passive point will be wasted. As a result, they're not that popular. The enchant you're looking for is either 10% increased damage while affected by a herald, or 10% increased minion damage while affected by a herald. There is no functional difference for crafting in regards to eye level on medium cluster jewels. They can only roll one socket regardless of eye level. Since we focus on notables, which also do not have eye level restrictions, you're good to go with any eye level on your base jewel. If you have entered those parameters correctly, you'll quickly realize that even just the bases for these particular jewels are upwards of 60 chaos. This is due to the 2 broken notables, Purposeful Harbinger and Heraldry, which are currently in incredibly high demand. Those will be your primary target goals for this jewel. I recommend the Chaos Spam crafting method for these as well. However, Alteration Orbs are technically better because an augment is very powerful on these. So, once the alterations are back to a 5:1, definitely use Alteration Orbs for these, and keep the chaos for the large ones. If you manage to get either one of those 2 notables with the jewel socket, you can usually sell them easily for 80 to 90 chaos, potentially more, depending on the other rolls that you got. Hitting the jackpot roll is worth about 400 chaos, with Purposeful Harbinger, Heraldry, and the jewel socket. It is not too difficult to hit these, but it should not be the expected return on investment every single time, of course. For small cluster jewels, a lot of the established rules change. Firstly, you're looking for the maximum possible number of passives, rather than the lowest amount. As a result, all of your crafting bases here should probably offer 3 small passives. Secondly, with small cluster jewels, the notable is oftentimes not the most important thing, but it's also about as important as the small passive benefits themselves. As a result, eye level is highly important for small cluster jewels. One example crafting base. Look for a minimum eye level of 84 plus. The number of small passives has to be 3. And lastly, the jewel needs the enchant added small passive skills grant 4% increased maximum life. You will find that these crafting bases are upwards of 60 chaos in value, without any rolls on them to begin with. There are no exact examples that I can give for small jewels. It's a very crazy market to get into, but it's also the one where you can probably make the most profit if you find yourself a niche and commit to it. For small cluster jewels, I'd recommend either chaos spamming or fossil crafting the bases. Fossil crafting works extremely well here, as the small passive benefits are actually affected by the fossil multipliers. As an example, with a pristine fossil, you have a hugely increased chance to hit any of the flat life modifiers for your jewel. While the prices for Alteration Orbs are still this high, I would advise not using them for any of the crafting purposes provided here. Wait until they're back to a 5:1 or 6:1 ratio before considering it to be worthwhile again. Except for the medium jewels, of course. I hope that this guide helped you understand a little bit more about the pricing of cluster jewels, as well as to potentially realize past mistakes that you might have made with selling or crafting them. There are an absolute ton of different ways to profit with the new cluster jewels. The methods shown here are simply the ones that I personally have used over the past few weeks to start off my league with. Feel free to explore the world of cluster jewels by looking at the most popular builds and determining which notables and modifiers I look for in specific for crafting them. Simply following my examples here will just oversaturate the intended market and lose you currency more likely than not, so I would recommend against it. Now, for the last little segment, I'll be covering the weekly Delve update, as well as a bunch of rapid-fire tips and tricks for this following week, like always. First up, the Delve update as despite the nerfs, delving is still a great use of their time and a good way to make some easy currency. Every fossil might have lost some value, as the overall demand has gone down due to the fossil crafting changes. However, a lot of them are still worthwhile to farm for and sell, especially in bulk. The best fossils to farm are currently corroded, perfect, saturated, loosened, and shuddering fossils in that order. As a result of this ranking, my recommendations would be the fungal caverns first and the frozen hollow second. The first one will provide you with a large amount of perfect, dense, outer-round, and corroded fossils. The second one will grant you an influx of prismatic, pristine, serrated, shuddering fossils. Focusing on these two will give you a wide spread of fossils to trade with, and both areas are fairly easy to traverse and don't have a ton of terrible encounters. The current prices for this week's top fossils are as follows. Corroded fossils are going for 9C, perfect fossils are sitting at around 7C, serrated fossils are at 6C, shuddering and loosened fossils have found themselves at 5C, and enchanted and gilded fossils are at around 4C each. The rest of the fossils are somewhere below the 2 Chaos mark, so they're only really worthwhile to farm and sell in very large bulks. So, happy fossil hunting, and good luck in your delves! Now, getting into the rapid fire tips and tricks section for this video. Run the Simulacrum. I know, I've mentioned it like 3 times this episode, but seriously, run it. Like, it's the new Blighted maps, but way better. You make a ton of currency off of these. Just make sure you're strong enough to actually finish it. And, of course, good luck on getting those voices. Use your essences. There are a ton of great uses for your leftover essences, either from Delirium encounters, your Simulacrum runs, or just normal mapping. Most people have tons of them lying around that just rot in their essence stash tab. Use them! A ton of essences can make a great deal of currency very easily. Throw a few fizz to attack essences on steel rings. Some mana or ES ones on cerulean rings. It's really easy to transform a 2 or 3 Chaos essence into a 40 Chaos plus item. Don't forget about your good essence friends. Level up additional impale supports. Use your offhand weapons and free sockets to level up additional impale supports. Double corrupting them for a 21-23 version is worth more than hitting an Elite level 4. Hitting a single +1 level will already net you over an Exalt each. Impale is really popular at the moment, so make use of this demand in the market. Now, with those last few tips wrapped up, I'll be ending this super long Chaos report. I hope this video was informative and you learned something from it that you can apply to your own game. Please let me know if I missed anything or you would have wanted me to talk about anything specific that I might not have covered. If you want to support the creation of these videos, always feel free to check out my Patreon and maybe consider signing up for it. Every dollar helps. You can find a link to it in the description down below. Any and all support is, of course, highly appreciated. If you have any suggestions for Patreon rewards that you guys would like to see, please let me know on my Discord's feedback channel down below this video in the comments or on my Twitter. I read pretty much all of your comments, like all the time. You can find a link to my Twitter and Discord down below in the description as well. And of course, don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell thing, like and dislike the video, and check me out over on twitch.tv/LoneWolf. I stream pretty much every day, and you can get some early insights to future episodes fairly easily, as I usually talk about my plans and thoughts about the Chaos Report like all the time. You can find a link to the stream in the description down below, of course. And with that, thanks for watching, and keep farming those Exalts.